So here's the lining on one side of my dress that I stitched with my machine. We're on step number 31. As I said before, you can either slip stitch this, so you can actually fold your lining on the inside of the dress over the zipper and then do a slip stitch just to close that up. I'm doing mine with the sewing machine instead, just because I want to do it more quickly. So I'm actually putting these together, so wrong sides together, and folding in the edge there. And then if you go into the skirt of your lining here and grab those two, you can pull the dress out. And I just do that to make sure that I'm sewing everything together exactly where it's supposed to be. Okay, so here's the top of my dress. And this is important here. So this is where the top should be whenever you flip it out. So you're going to flip right there at that line, which means that you're also going to be encasing your understitching inside of this stitch. And this is also easier for me to do because since I had to do a fitting on mine, instead of having to go through and kind of pin this together how I think it should fit, I can actually just keep pinning and matching up my seams like this. Okay, and then you'll also want to match up your side seam if you can. So here's my side seam on the inside of my right fabric. I'm going to match that up with my side seam on the lining fabric, with the zipper there on the inside. Okay, so just go ahead and pin this together if you want to do this the same way that I'm doing, and just match up your seams so that your fitting is on both pieces. And then I would recommend that you just stitch maybe 3 or 4 inches below the waist seam, because then once we've done that, we'll need to sew together our back pieces here to encase the zipper. So I'm going to finish pinning this, and then I will let you watch me stitch it on the sewing machine. So I'm now ready to stitch in my zipper with the lining encased here, and I have to switch out the foot for my zipper foot, and I need to be stitching on the inside of the zipper here. So I need that side of the zipper to be encased in this. So I'm using my invisible zipper foot here, and then I'm just going to place that right inside of that casing there. And then we're ready to start stitching. And if you feel more comfortable, then of course you can baste this if you prefer. I'm just going to go ahead and stitch mine down. And basically by letting my zipper foot just hold the zipper and guide it through, I'll be doing my fitting for my dress at the same time. Meaning that all of my seam lines here are going to match up the way that I did my fitting without me having to work so hard and without me having to mark this. Okay, and I'm reaching the bottom here where I'm going to stitch just a little bit further down. Okay, so I'm going to be closing up my lining around here because that's as far down as my zipper goes. So I just want to stitch to maybe like right around here. And then do a back stitch. Okay. And then the next thing I'll do is flip all of this out so that I can make sure everything looks nice, and I will press open these seams just to keep everything really crisp looking, and then I'm going to try it on again to make sure I don't have any weird puckers. So now I have my skirt linings right sides together, still on the inside of the dress and below the zipper, and I'm just going to close up a little bit more of that seam. And that's just doing a regular 5/8 inch stitch that's going to meet the 5/8 inch stitch that I already did before. So back stitching. Just continuing along here. And then meeting up with that previous stitching. All right. Now go through and trim out any extra threads that you may have, and then it's also a good idea to go ahead and press this new seam open as well. I'm going to go flip my dress out the correct way so that you can see what mine looks like after doing all of that. Okay, so now we just need to flip this out. So as you can see, I have my right side of my fabric here and my lining, and I'm just going to go into the lining again and grab the right side of my dress and then just pull it out like so. And then you can see the lining part here. Get my sleeve untangled. Okay. And then you can check your lining just to see how it looks with your zipper. So here's what mine looks like after stitching it. So the last part of finishing up the zipper here is after you try everything on, if everything still looks good, then you need to go inside the dress, and you'll want to go to these seams where you have all that extra fabric, especially if you did a fitting like I did, and you'll want to trim that out to 5/8 anywhere where it's not 5/8. Then the second thing I'm going to do is I will do just a little bit of hand slip stitching just right here at the bottom of my zipper, just so this isn't flying around. So do your trimming. We'll do a try on first. Always do a try on. Try it on. If you're happy with it, trim everything out, and then you can slip stitch the bottom of the zipper. And then this is what you'll be left with. You can see my right side of my dress here, and then if I flip it over to look at the zipper, this is my zipper with the lining sewn in, not slip stitched, but actually sewn in, and it's beautiful and works just fine. So once you've finished sewing in your lining, whether you did it by hand or you did it the way that I did it using your machine, you should be on step 32 now, which is sewing on the hook and eye. I'll just show you mine very quickly. I've already done this, and I've covered this enough in my videos. I'm sure you guys are experts at doing this by now. Okay, so you're just sewing on a simple hook and eye, just using a small little hand stitch there to do all of those. And then the very next thing that I will be doing is starting my hem for the right side of my fabric. So the first place that I'm going to work on is here at the bottom of my dress where the vent is. So here's my vent. I've already hand stitched this side, and I'm now going to work on the other side. I used my my red chalk that washes out to just barely outline where the fold line needs to be. So I would recommend that you lay this flat and either look at it and try to see where you think it should fold and then just pin it nicely, because I also frequently do that and don't mark it, and I don't ever have any problems with that. Or if you're nervous about it, you can make your your line here using your pattern piece and mark where that vent should close exactly. So I would recommend that before you start hand stitching this, you lay it flat and pin it down. And then once I have pinned this other side, I'll show you just briefly how to start that stitch, and then you need to finish it up the rest yourself. So now I'm going to sew my vent in place, and I just have a needle here that's double threaded, and that's just my personal preference. So I've pinned down my vent, and I matched it up using my washable red chalk that's lined up here. Now I'm just going to fold this over slightly. You can stitch on the raw edge if you want. I just usually prefer not to. So I'm going to turn mine in over the needle and just grab a small piece of my fabric here, and then just run it through like that. And I'll show you this a few times, and you can make them pretty well spaced out, especially if you're going to be adding the lining like I did, because this is all going to be covered by the lining. Okay, so just continue like that throughout the entire vent, and don't pull it too tightly because you don't want it to start bunching. So just keep it loose but fitted, and just keep grabbing a little thread at a time and then grabbing onto your right side of your fabric. It's a pretty fast hand stitch to do, actually. Okay, so just finish that up and then join me again. So I just finished my vent. It's all hand stitched into place. The next thing that I'll be working on is also hand stitching the hem. And of course, according to your height or where you want your dress to actually hit on you, you may want to do something different other than what I'm doing. I am probably going to turn mine up either an inch or a ½ inch. I'm thinking with the weight of my fabric, I'm probably going to do an 1.5 inches. And what I'll do to mark that is I'll actually take this to my sewing machine and I'll do a basting stitch at 1.5 inches, and it just makes it easier for me to then turn this up, pin this in place, and then start hand stitching it. And I'll be doing the same stitch for this that I did on the vent here, because all of this for me is going to be hidden once I attach the lining. So if you want to do this the way that I'm doing it and you're adding a lining, go ahead now and mark with a basting stitch or with a washout marker if you prefer, or even a pencil, so long as it doesn't show through, where you want your hemline to be. So this is my dress with the basting. I did end up doing an 1.5 inches because I think it's going to look better than just 1 inch by itself. And I used blue basting thread here. You can see that more easily. All of that basting will come out as soon as I finish my hem, so that's fine. Now I'm just going to turn this up on the inside of the dress where the marking is, meaning my basting. And then I'm going to pin that down throughout the entire hem. And then once I've pinned that, I'll be doing that same tiny hand stitch throughout this entire hem. So this is what the hem looks like after I've finished hand stitching it. And then on the outside too. So the next thing that you'll need to do if you're adding a lining like I did is also do a hand stitching for the vent of the lining. And you do that the exact same way that you did the right side of the fabric. So I just measured that using my pattern piece, and then I just hand stitched that down in the exact same way. Now the next thing I'm going to do is a basting stitch just like I did for the right side of the fabric, once again, at 1.5 inches all the way across this. And then I'll show you how I pin this to the right side of my fabric so that I can finish up the bottom of my skirt. So here's my dress so far. The next thing that I need to do is to take in my sleeves a little bit. As you can see, they're quite a bit big. One thing I would recommend to you before you start working on this is to actually tuck your sleeve in. Okay, because whenever you have extra fabric, it kind of makes the sleeve bunch in a way that looks unattractive, and you might get your fitting, you might do your fitting in a weird way. So I would recommend that you just quickly turn that up and kind of mark where you want it to be. Okay, I think I like this for mine. Alright, so just marked that. And then I'm going to take my pins and just start slowly tapering this in. Just don't make it too tight that you can't move your arm. This is tricky. That's how I do it. It's hard. If you can get someone to help you with it, it's better. So now I'm just going to take the dress off and try to keep the pins as they are. If you're worried about your pins coming out, then you can of course go ahead and use your tailor's chalk or pencil or whatever it is that you prefer whenever you're sewing. And I'm just going to finish up those sleeves, and I'll let you guys watch me sew those, of course. One other thing I forgot to mention, in case anyone is wondering, I did have to tack down the sides of my dress here, and that made a world of difference in how my dress looked. So if you find that your little side shoulder pieces over here are popping up, then I would highly recommend tacking them. I didn't want to lose the look of them being detached, so I did only stitch them right here, and I just did that by hand, and I left this open at the side. So if you're having problems with that, I do recommend doing that. Alright, so I'm going to stitch the sleeves now and I'll let you watch. So here's my sleeve. The first thing that I did was I marked exactly where I want my hem to end, and then I pulled all this excess out. And then the next thing I'm going to do is just flip this. Okay. And then lay it back out. And because this is pinned, I'm able to see exactly where my new seam needs to be. And I'm just going to mark that with my tailor's chalk on the inside. And you don't need to do both sides. You can do one side and then just match up your seam lines. Okay, so just do that for your entire sleeve, and then rejoin me after you've finished tracing all of that out. Now that I've finished my markings, I'm just going to flip it right side out again. And then I'm going to keep the pin in at the bottom where I want to hem, or turn up rather, and then just remove all of my pins. Then I'm going to turn it back again. And then you see where I have my marking. I'm going to repin this together, making sure that my piece is laying flat. I'm going to also mark where my basting and permanent stitch start. So this is the permanent stitch I did in the sleeve earlier, and then I started basting from here down. So I'm going to use a pin just to make note of where that is. And then since I have quite a bit of material I need to take in here and my permanent stitches up here, I'm just going to try to draw that line so that it doesn't look quite so blunt. Okay. So that means I'll have a little bit of extra fabric here, but it's always easier for me to do a fitting like that so that I don't have to do all kinds of fitting at the sleeve. I know at the shoulder I'm always going to be that size 10 in the dress pattern, so it's just easier for me to do this that way. Alright, so that is redrawn. I think I can go a little bit more in with that there. Okay, and then I'm just going to repin this together just to make sure that things don't move around too much while I'm sewing. And then I will go to my sewing machine and I will restitch this piece following that line. Alright, now that I am ready to stitch my sleeve, I'm just going to set this up to go right back over the permanent stitching that I had done. Oops, hold on. Preferably without a basting stitch. Ah, okay. So I'm just going to do a little bit of stitching on top of that permanent stitch that I already did. Back stitch. And then I'm going to start tapering into this new line. Alright, and as you can see, I don't have any more drawn line through here. That's because my sleeve is going to be stopping right here. So for the rest of this, I'm just going to keep it at about the same distance. And a lot of this is going to be trimmed out. Okay. So just stitching at that same distance or close to it, back stitch, and then don't worry too much about this because a lot of that's going to be cut out. Now if you have long arms, then obviously you should still have more blue line running down here. It will depend on where you had to alter your sleeve. Okay, so do at least this much for both of your sleeves and then come back and join me again. So after I finished stitching my sleeve, I took out the basting and then I pressed my seam open again. I tried it back on and everything was looking okay, so this is done now and I am ready to move on to the next step. Now that my sleeve is freshly trimmed and the basting was removed and the seam was pressed open, I tried the dress on, everything's looking good, so now I'm ready to actually hem my sleeves. So this is my pin that I put in to mark my hem line. And I'm just going to measure that out. and it's pretty much exactly at 2 inches. Now I only want to turn my sleeve up an inch on the inside, so I want to remove 1 inch off the end here. And what you should do is actually take a pencil and mark this out and actually mark across your entire sleeve. I don't want to do that. I'm going to do this the fast way. So I'm just going to make sure that my seams are lined up, and then I'm going to place my measuring tape here, and then I'm just going to cut across. Okay, and I'm going to do that on my other sleeve as well. So do that on both of your sleeves, and then once you've done that, you should turn this back out the other way, just because it's a little easier to sew that way. All right. And then I'm going to take this to my sewing machine and do a basting stitch at 1 inch. Once I've done the basting stitch, I will turn this in, matching that so that my basting is here on the outside, and then I'm just going to hand stitch this down just like I did the hem of my dress. So here's my dress with the sleeves finished. Here they both are, and then they're just hand stitched on the inside. The last thing that I need to do for my dress is to finish up the hem, which we talked about a little bit before. So I have my right side of my fabric done. Now I'm going to be doing the lining of my dress. So I've already done the basting here. Now I'm just going to fold across my basting there, which is 1.5 inches, and then I'm going to pin it over the inside of my right side of the nice fabric at about 5/8 above. Okay, and that will give me a little bit of wiggle room on the inside, because you don't want your lining to be exactly matched up with your dress, because it may make puckers or it may make the fabric pull in strange ways. So I'm hemming the lining the exact same amount that I did the right side of the fabric, but I'm going to aim about 5/8 higher, okay? And then I'm just going to pin that. I'll match up my seams first, and then I'll fit it throughout the rest of the dress, and then I'll do that same hand stitch all the way across. This is also a good time to open out your dress before you finish the hem and just check on the inside that you've trimmed out everything that you need to, because if you stitch your lining to your dress like I'm going to, you're no longer going to have easy access to the inside of the dress. So make sure that if you have any loose threads, or if you have larger seams from where you did alterations, you want to make sure that everything is trimmed to at least 5/8 or smaller if you prefer. And then just cut out your extra threads and anything that looks messy.